Hello, this is Aaron Eckhart, and you are listening to Center Stage with Mark Gordon, the beautiful one and only Mark Gordon.
Welcome to Center Stage. My name is Mark Gordon. On this program, we're going to talk with Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski about their latest film, Big Eyes. It's the story of Margaret and Walter Keane and one of the most epic art frauds in history. Nobody knew about this story, and how is it that you guys uncovered this story and then found it was good material for a film?
It's one of those things where everyone knows the art. We sort of don't expect people to know the behind the scenes almost of any of our films, but they generally, when we do these biographies, everybody is sort of famous for one thing, and usually what they're famous about is not necessarily the story. You know, Andy Kaufman's famous for Taxi, but that's not really what our movie was about. So this was one of the things where we of course knew the art. We knew the art from just the fact that it was everywhere, particularly when we were much younger. We stumbled onto the actual story. We were working on a science fiction project, believe it or not. A movie that never got made, but it took place on another planet. And a bunch of Earth garbage kind of lands on their planet, and they're completely won over by it. Rapidly, they start wearing bell-bottom jeans and listening to MC Hammer albums. And so we're looking for examples of 20th century pop culture, hopefully funny pop culture or forgotten pop culture that we could infect this planet with. And Scott was reading a book.
My wife had a book called The Encyclopedia of Bad Taste, which was very helpful. We were looking for things like the Pet Rock, Village People, fur boots from the 70s. Right. And anything that was just over the top kitsch or weird or tasteless perhaps, and there was a 2-page essay on the Keanes, and it was this crazy story, and I just couldn't believe it. And it was just kind of a quick overview of the rise and fall of Margaret and Walter, and I was just astonished. And I showed it to Larry. I said, wow, this is really an interesting one, because when we do our biopics, I mean, the more obscure, the better for us. We don't want, like Larry said, we don't want stories that people know. We want stories that happen in the margins of pop culture. And this kind of seemed to have it all, because the paintings are incredibly famous, but nobody knows anything about them. And now people do because we made a movie. But the psychodrama behind the paintings and this crazy George and Martha wacko relationship between Margaret and Walter, and all this stuff about high art and low art and kitsch and what is good art and what is bad art, and Walter sort of changing the face of mass marketing of art. I mean, there was like a lot of big stuff in there. And so we started doing some research when we had free time. Larry's friends with Matthew Sweet, who's a rock and roller and also the world's biggest Keane fanatic. Matthew has a house stacked high and low with Keane originals, and then Matthew's so far gone, he also has all the Keane knockoffs. There were a lot of artists like Franca and Eve and Igor who were all pumping out faux Keanes in the 60s. So Matthew has those. Matthew also has a lot of magazine articles and old Keane brochures and Keane publications and everything you ever want. So we looked at all Matthew's stuff, then we went to the library and we got deep into the microfiche with the old San Francisco newspapers. Right,
because it was stuff that wasn't available on a Google search. Because most of the Keanes really had their peak popularity in the early '60s, and that stuff wasn't easily Google via Google, particularly back in 2003. And that's how we stumbled onto things like the Danny Houston character in the movie, the Dick Nolan character, in that Walter kept on...
he was a journalist?
Yeah. He kept on popping up in this gossip column all the time.
Suspiciously often.
Yeah. So there would just be planted stories. Walter Keane seen at Alphonse restaurant, or Walter Keane, him telling a joke, or just, we love it because we're big fans of a movie called The Sweet Smell of Success, which is about that sort of 1950s gossip, nightclub world. And so when we read these Dick Nolan articles, that's instantly came to our mind. But what was interesting when we were doing all this research, it was really telling the Walter Keane story, because Walter Keane was the person who had the was the front man. He was the person who was out there telling all the stories. So we were really getting a one-sided thing. And we knew enough about the story that we knew Margaret was the real painter, but we weren't getting her side of the story. And so that made us, we had to go track down the real Margaret Keane. And so Matthew got us in touch with the gallery, a really nice gentleman, a guy named Robert Brown, who then...
gallery in San Francisco.
Yeah, the Keen Eyes Gallery. And they arranged a meeting for us to fly up and spend some time with Margaret. And that's where the heart and soul of the movie came together.
It's funny and touching and sad. Here's a woman that's really struggling to find her voice, and what she does, the resolve that she has, it resonates not only for women, men, but anyone that wants to do something to really follow what they're passionate about and to have their own voice be heard. And it's just a great film about emancipation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. I mean, part of our shaping of the story and kind of what to tell and what not to tell and what time periods to cover was to be able to start Margaret kind of coming out of 50 suburbia. So we would sort of have that image of the audience's head of like a woman's place sort of in that era, and the husband is the spokesman for the family. And I'm sure back then, if Margaret had stationery printed up, for sending mail, envelopes would have said, Mrs. Walter Keane.
Right.
That's how it was done back then. And then we wanted the movie to sort of end where it feels like we don't say dates, but it feels like about 1970, and women's lib is starting to bubble up in the background, and that's when Margaret now has the courage to speak her voice, as you said.
Well, even in looking at a film like Vertigo, when James Stewart's he's got Kim Novak and they're shopping, and she wants a certain dress, and he goes, no, do that one. And then the lady helping Kim Novak says, I believe Monsieur knows what Madame wants.
Yes.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. Oh,
Wow.
good. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And it's funny. Hitchcock was a little bit of in the back of Tim's mind for some parts of the movie. There's certainly the woman trapped in a house part of the film, the blonde trapped in a house that feels very Hitchcockian.
For obvious reasons, we talked about Vertigo just because it was San Francisco in our time period.
Right. But Rebecca is also another, touchstone. And it's funny. Kim Novak actually was a friend of Walter Keane. Walter Keane and Kim Novak had a little bit of a relationship. Google the two names and you'll see a bunch of pictures where they're painting together. Walter really discovered early on that art critics didn't take him seriously, so he went to celebrities. Anytime a celebrity was up in San Francisco, he would gift them with a painting and make sure there was a person there with a camera. So all of a sudden they would end up in a newspaper with Kim Novak holding a painting, Joan Crawford holding a painting, Natalie Wood holding a painting. And that's what he kind of built his empire on, because all of a sudden the common man would say, oh, that's the art that Hollywood collects. And so, and once Walter figured out how to make the prints cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, having that Hollywood connection allowed him to just mass market it and appear on things like the Merv Griffin Show and the Jack Parr Show and just
or even better, Joan Crawford on the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
Saying, look at this gorgeous painting I just acquired.
Right. Joan Crawford put two Keane paintings in Baby Jane. They're in the background in Baby Jane, and it's actually
hanging in the house.
Yeah. And their portrait of Joan is in the background of her autobiography.
In doing this research, you got to meet Margaret, obviously,
Yes.
and then she gave you the rights also to her paintings as well.
Right.
Well, that was a deal breaker for us. I mean, what's weird is, we have all these posters of all these biopics we've done. This is the first time Larry and I have ever actually sought out somebody for the rights ourselves. We've either done movies that were unauthorized or where somebody was bringing us rights. And we got movies made, and we've written a bunch of scripts that did not get made. But we've never been the guys tracking someone down, with a checkbook in hand. And the reason with Margaret was we needed the art, and it was kind of a tricky request because, we're just two guys who have never asked for someone's art rights before. But I mean, we knew practically that there's no way to make this movie without Margaret's permission. I mean, there was a biopic a few years ago, Picasso. Was the title Picasso? No.
It was like Surviving Picasso or something like that?
Yes, yeah. Surviving.
Yeah, and we like to make fun of the predicament the filmmakers found themselves in because they did it without permission, and then the Picasso estate said, you can't reproduce any of our work. And so they had to do a movie full of fake Picassos, which just seems kind of silly. And it's like, what's the point of making a movie where you're going to have fake Keens?
Yeah.
You just kind of reached the end of the line at that point. So we needed Margaret's permission, and for the art, and as long as we're doing that, we wanted, her life rights. And so we had to earn her trust. And, it actually took us 1 year to win Margaret over.
Well, I can imagine, especially what she had already been through.
Exactly. She's
Yes.
very shy. She's a very quiet woman. She's very reserved. She didn't really necessarily want these bad times, drudged up again.
I mean, also she'd reached a sort of just a nice, content point in her life.
Right.
I mean, she had the gallery. There's certain people, her fans, who would do commissions. So the commissions can pay the bills, and then when she's not doing commissions, she can just paint whatever little children make her happy. Those go up in the gallery. It's in Ghirardelli Square.
But I do think there was a bit of she still felt that a lot of people still thought Walter Keane was a painter. Because when the trial took place after the Keanes' fame had kind of gone down a bit. So when they were super famous, Walter was the front man and the spokesperson. And when it came out during the trial, it was more like in the back of the newspaper. It was like those two people are fighting about that art, that you no longer pay attention to. And so she really feels she never really got the proper due.
And then Walter lived for another 14 years after the trial. Even though he lost, he kept giving interviews saying he was the painter. Because who can stop him?
Right.
He's just a crazy, determined man. And and Margaret was never somebody chasing down news stories. Walter was.
But what we got from Margaret was the personal stuff. Like, for example, we didn't know how far the conspiracy went. In terms, did other people in the gallery know? Did her daughter know? And we just assumed that her daughter knew. And she told us that she had to lie to her own daughter.
Well,
I mean, here's the thing: the
daughter knew, but didn't know.
Right.
It was this big, terrible, very obvious elephant in the room, where Margaret, Walter, and Jane are all living together. Okay, Jane's young; she's 9, but she's not stupid, and she knows Mommy is in the painting room 12 hours a day, and Walter's out partying, and then Walter keeps walking out with new paintings. It's not hard to figure out what's going on, but it was that which is never discussed. And if Jane tried to bring it up, Margaret would shoot her down, saying, "No, Walter is the painter."
Right.
And so Jane knew that Margaret was lying to her, and Margaret could look in Jane's eyes and know that Jane knew she was being lied to, and this was killing Margaret. That it was like creating this gulf, and Margaret wasn't close to anybody else. So the only person she's close to, she's just lying to her face for 10 years.
Right. And once Margaret told us that, we knew that was wow. That's powerful stuff. That would be a central core to our film.
Yeah, and until Margaret told us that in the interview, Jane as a character we hadn't even thought about.
Right.
Because Jane wasn't showing up in any of the newspaper stories.
Right. Except as background.
It's interesting with her character as she's painting these children. She's really doing self-portraits because the kids all look displaced, marginalized,
Right.
lonely, and that was her life.
Well,
Yes.
that's funny you say
Yes.
that because I think that's one of the good things that would come out of the movie. That the art is considered kitsch by a lot of people, but I think it's considered kitsch because they either know it one of two ways or both ways. The one is that it's the artwork of Walter Keane, who's this masculine Robert Mitchum guy with a scotch, and it really makes no sense whatsoever that he's painting these children holding kittens, and it's sort of there's a disconnect there that this seems super odd. It doesn't seem sincere, or it as just anonymous art, that you bought in Woolworths or your grandmother bought in Woolworths. And once again,
Or your great-grandmother.
Exactly, at this point. And so it just seems like commerce. But when you realize that most of the paintings are coming from a place of sincerity, when Margaret is painting these sad eyes with a tear in it because she's locked up in the attic and she has no other outlet, so she's actually expressing herself and her emotions through these paintings, they take on a different feeling. They take on a different emotion that you wouldn't get now, and maybe that's not enough for certain people to say they're great paintings or they're but there's certainly an element of folk art or an element of just like there's something real there, and I think for a lot of people, they never expected that to come out of the Keane painting. The idea that those are real emotions. That's sincerity.
Walter's cover story was so bizarre. I mean, there was this extremely elaborate introduction to one of their books, which was allegedly written by Tom Wolfe under a pseudonym, and then Walter kind of like co-opted a lot of the storytelling in that introduction for the rest of his life in terms of his backstory. And I mean, this whole elaborate thing about traveling World War II traveling the continent after World War II and going to the orphanages and seeing the children in the bombed out buildings with the scrawny fingers and the distended bellies and the big eyes pleading, "Help me, help me." It's so crazy.
Margaret had such a strong core value of honesty.
Yeah.
And Walter didn't. And so for the 10 plus years, she had to, I could see that would be a big dilemma for her to hold on to.
Well, I mean, what we really locked onto with her becoming a Jehovah's Witness was the idea that you have to live an honest life, and you have to discard, any untruths, and that's what gave her the confidence to finally out Walter, which she wasn't able to do until then.
And the thing was, I think what happened to Walter is he discovered that he was really good at lying. That in a sense that was his art. His art, he became a grand liar, a grand fraud, which is kind of interesting. And that his lies, I guess, at a certain point he thought, like, why lie small? If you're going to lie, if you're going to create this persona for yourself, then start comparing yourself to Michelangelo and Gauguin, and and just really sell yourself as one of the great painters of all time, as opposed to just like, hey, I have a gallery and I'm a good struggling artist and I do good work. He really aimed to be in the pantheon.
I don't know if that's a lie. That's just being obnoxious.
That's being obnoxious, but it's delusional. But I think whatever. Like I remember reading interviews with Milli Vanilli. It was after The Fraud came out that they weren't really singing, but I'd go back and read the Rolling Stone interview, and they would say, like, there's the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Milli Vanilli. And it was very Walter Keane-esque, where they actually saw themselves in the history of rock and roll as being as important as those guys. So I think it's one of these things where you have this thing and you can't turn it off.
Walter was lying in a pre-internet world, and it was really easy to keep changing your story.
Sure.
And which is something that some people have found kind of interesting, in that the cover story changes during the movie. I mean, if you're watching carefully, Walter starts out saying that Margaret is the painter of the waifs. And then as soon as the waifs become popular, he just changes his mind and says, I'm the painter of the waifs. And that is what happened in real life. I mean, we found, in our notebooks, we've got the newspapers from 1958 and 59, where he's promoting Margaret as the painter of the kids. And then he changes his mind. And it's so funny that nobody notices. In the world we're living in now, a 5-year-old on Google could figure this out. But back then, just nobody cared. It was just like yesterday's newspapers on the parrot cage. And who cares?
Because Margaret went along with it, and I think that's a key thing, too, is that Margaret was a part of the lie. She wasn't just a victim. Even if anyone was remotely suspicious, like, he says he's the painter, she says he's the painter. So why would you even investigate?
He's so caught up in the success of the lie. This is just a throwaway moment, but we got it from one of our interviews with Margaret. Was they get to a certain point late in the marriage where Walter allows Margaret to have a style under her own name. And so there are now two types of Keane. There's Walter Keane paintings and there's Margaret Keane paintings, and they're very distinct. And Walter actually put out a book under her name. But then once he starts resenting her new success, he then went to her and said, okay, we're going to change it again. Now those are mine too. And that was just a little throwaway story she told us. But the idea that he thought in his delusions, sure, I can get away with that. Yesterday, you were the painter of those. Tomorrow, it's going to be me. And everyone's going to go along with that. It's just completely incredible.
Tell me about your process of putting this piece together. And does it evolve? Because you've done several biopics.
I'm not sure it's really evolved. We've been writing together now for decades. We kind of
It's just a grind.
Yeah, it is a grind, which I think actually, if you're a writer out there, you know what we're talking about, and also I think that's encouraging in the sense that, like, I know when we were first starting out, we had a meeting with Lowell Gantz and Babalu Mandel, who were big writers at the time, and we really looked up to them. And at the end of the meeting, they had to plan out when they were going to meet the next day to write, and we looked, and you could tell this kind of like really just sad
That they have to go to work.
Oh, geez, I got to go to the doctor's office at 10:30. We'll meet at 11, and then I got to, and
All right, I'll see you at 11.
and
Yeah,
it was like, whoa, that's, even if you're like amazingly successful, you still have to do that. So we still have to do that. We treat it like a job. We meet every day. Scott's behind the keyboard. I'm on the couch, or I pace around, and we plot things out. We use old-fashioned index cards. We don't have like a computer program for that. We actually have a cork board, and we put the each scene on a card and put it up there, and it allows us to see the movie, to step back and like be able to see like first act, second act, third act. The biopics and we consider a lot of different people, as subjects, but usually it comes almost pretty much right away when we hear a story, or we try to figure out how to tell the least amount of time, cover the least amount of time as possible, because we hate biopics that are 3 hours long and go from the moment they were born to when they die. And for us, it's more about like asking that question: why are these people important, or why are these people going to be remembered, or why we want to tell the story? And if you can answer that question, you probably have something that resembles your third act, because that allows the movie to get out on why they exist.
And then we also always come up with the theme of the movie, or the themes of the movie, because there always have to be a couple ideas running through the film, as opposed to just, we're going to recreate this person's life for 2 hours.
Right.
I mean, if there's not larger ideas, then it becomes so what?
Right.
Who cares? Fine, you recreate the person's life.
Well, all the biopics that you've worked on, is there a through line? Is there something that is similar to?
Yes, they are all about an iconoclast who has a big idea and is very, very passionate about this big idea. And the big idea is probably wrong, and society is very disapproving of what this person is trying to achieve. But our person just keeps swimming upstream, despite the fact that everyone is telling him to turn around. And for us, it's completely delightful, because we're rooting for this. In this movie, oddly, it's actually the antagonist who's that character. It's Walter. So all of our characters tend to be guys who just have this big, weird dream that's really screwy, but they sincerely believe in what they're doing, and they won't back down. And I mean, we started calling it the anti-great man biopic because it's pure conflict. And in writing class, you're taught that conflict is drama, and they're in conflict at all times because what they're doing is kind of wrong.
Or at least society thinks is wrong.
Yeah.
Or society thinks is wrong-headed. We've made movies about people who are labeled the worst filmmaker of all time, or the worst artist of all time, or the most disgusting pornographer of all time, or a comedian who doesn't tell jokes.
Or the unfunniest comedian of all time.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think what makes our scripts interesting and different is we kind of take a non-judgmental view of them. And Big Eyes, art critics or the gallery owners are there to tell us what people at the time thought of the Keens, or at least the culture thought of the Keens, but we don't comment on the art. We don't tell you whether Ed Wood's movies are good or bad, or the Keens arts are good or bad. We let you make that judgment yourself.
The turn stamp character.
Tim gets points for that one for doing something very unexpected. We worked with Tim on a bunch of the casting. I'm not sure we worked with Tim on that character. No. And we wrote the part as what is when you picture the fussy, protect the establishing order, leading art critic of the old WASP New York Times from the mid-century. It's what you're picturing. It's Tony Randall in a bow tie. It's Wallace Shawn. It's a fussy, prissy man, and that's what we were picturing. And then just him had this hilarious idea of casting this ball-breaking Terrence Stamp, this imperious, godlike figure who just won't take shit from anybody. which was really funny because it meant doing a slight adjustment in the scene where they confront each other, because we wrote it that when Walter gets angry and starts to pick a fight, the guy hides behind a group of women. And Tim said, you got to change one line with this piece of casting. We're like, which line? And then he said, Terrence Stamp doesn't hide behind anybody.
No, that's a very powerful, because it not only tells us a lot about the critic, it tells us a lot about Walter.
Yeah. But it also says that, I think what Tim was recognizing is that the critic had to be this powerful voice of God, in a sense, that this establishment that
the buck stops with him,
right? And so to make him a fussy man would have given Walter too much power. That you can't get Terrence Stamp to back down.
Come on, man! He was in Superman.
He's great. He's great. I mean, that scene is a total riot, and Tim really improved it by casting someone so completely crazy in that part.
How does this one stay? Because the films are all fairly different, like autofocus, very creepy. I mean, a part of Bob Crane, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. That who knew, and just looking at technology, the guy brings in a VCR.
Yeah.
It's the size of a trunk.
Yeah,
that was
the helical scan.
Yeah.
Video recorder. That movie's obsession with lumbering early video technology at a cross axis with out of control sex, with melding these two ideas.
Yeah, the technology we love in that film, because for us it was these guys who VCRs were a miracle. It was like, wait a second. Basically, filming, you can have sex with a woman the night before and then watch it the next day. I mean, that's a mind-blowing idea when it first happened.
Yeah,
Even the idea of watching Johnny Carson the next day is mind-blowing.
Do you ever just go, look what we found? I mean, you find these stories and just go, oh my God.
I mean, we realize that we've had a very blessed career, in the sense that we've made movies that most people feel like they do ask that question: how the heck do you get that made? I remember when a friend of mine saw pretty autofocus, they were like saying, like, you guys are like super producers. I mean, how do you get a movie like that? Funded by Sony of all places.
With autofocus, I mean, where I'll give us the credit. I mean, Michael wrote it. It was brought to us by Michael and a pal of his, Todd Roskin, and they had the rights to the book. Which was about the murder of Bob Crane, about the investigation in Scottsdale, and they wanted to make a movie about a grizzled police detective who works too much and he drinks a bit and his marriage is breaking up, and this is a case he just can't crack. And it was written by
Robert Graysmith.
Yeah, Graysmith, who also wrote Zodiac. And
so he's kind of fascinated by these unsolved mysteries.
And that's all fine and good, and we said, who cares?
Yeah.
And then we just started riffing, saying, now if we were going to make this movie, it's about the guy who is a good family man in Tarzana, and then he falls into this world, and then his marriage breaks up, and then he can't stop himself, and now the show's off the air, and now he's putting on the leather jacket, and he's walking into bars near golf courses at 4 p.m. because he knows there's a rerun of his old show, and he wants to be recognized so he can pick up the local girl while he's touring in some crappy dinner theater show. And to us, that was sort of like the rise and fall that we thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And then Todd and Michael were like, well, really? Oh, okay. Well, let's try it that way. And it's all about the version of the story you choose to tell and how you want to shape it. Because, somebody could have made a movie about that detective in Scottsdale, but it wouldn't be us.
You guys meet in film school.
Yes.
And then what was it about each other that there was just this synergy?
I mean, we just started, we had this idea of, again, it wasn't even an idea for a movie. It was a crazy newspaper story, and we started joking about it, and then saying, "Well, yeah, but what if that high school kid in that newspaper story were actually Morris Day from the time? Yeah, and what if instead of getting in a fight with the school principal, he got in a fight with Albert Brooks, who lived in the house." And what if Albert Brooks had a next door neighbor, Walter Matthau, who's a lawyer who doesn't like him? And we're just riffing on this weird true life story, and suddenly we had an idea for a movie, and we sort of, we giggle at the same stuff. So that's what provoked us into actually trying to write a script together.
And it sold a few weeks after we graduated from college, and we've kind of been working ever since. So it's kind of one of those things where we just keep on keeping on.
What did you learn about the process making Big Eyes?
I guess I don't know whether we learned it in a good way or bad way, but never give up. I mean, for a long time people thought we were crazy.
There was a lot of career sabotage.
Yeah, because our career
Yeah.
was just prepping Big Eyes. I mean, working on a movie for 11 years, it's like there are people saying, "Oh, dude, move on."
Because you're not getting paid.
Right, we're not getting paid. But not only that, it's you're paying money.
You're paying in. Yeah, I mean,
so we did a couple other films in that time period, but Big Eyes was our sort of our dream project, and that's what we kept on concentrating on, and also because
I'm looking at the 1408 poster, and when we were working on 1408 is when we started trying to gear up Big Eyes for real. Mm-hmm. And that movie came out in 2007.
Yeah.
And this is our first credit since 1408. So it's been 7 years because we just kept trying to make this dang movie.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if this is a stretch, but in looking at Margaret's life and as it's chronicled in the film, 10 years kind of in silence, and after that 10th year,
oh wow,
she gets the recognition.
Oh, that's it.
And
that's
your film took 10 years in the process, and now you're going to get the recognition that you deserve.
That's an interesting parallel.
And also, too, that don't give up, because that's her thing, is do not give up. I mean, does part of that, maybe it's on a super conscious level, but it winds up in the work?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't aware of it at the time in terms of sort of throwing good after bad. You keep losing at the poker table, so you keep putting more chips on. We didn't know how long this was going to go on. I mean, we've talked about this. I don't know how Larry votes. If you told me in 2003 it'd be 11 years when the movie came out, I wouldn't have worked on the movie. There's no way we would have committed up front.
What was it about that you didn't cut bait and say, look, okay, did you set a time frame? Or
no, we didn't. I mean, we don't do that. We believe in the story. We got enough encouragement. I mean, there's always some version of it in kind of pre-production, whether it was a version with Thomas Hayden Church or a version with Reese Witherspoon, or there was enough people like coming to us and saying this script is really good. Let's try to figure out how to make it.
Well, but we didn't do the slushy Marx Brothers because we used
the slushy Marx Brothers.
Yeah, we our old agent who we were with for more than 20 years, and then he retired, so that's why he's no longer our agent. Tom Strickler, he would get completely fed up that Larry and I wouldn't let projects die. And we had a project about a drunken snowman called Slushy, and we also had this biopic about the Marx Brothers, and he would get so angry at us that he would set us up in meetings to go, oh, this is producer, you guys don't know, I think you would really get along well. I'm gonna set up a general meeting, you go in just to get to know each other, and then he'd call back later that day like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? Why did you bring up Slushy?
Right.
I just got a phone call that I'm supposed to send this producer Slushy now. No one wants to make your drunken snowman picture. Just stop it. Stop it. You reach a point with a project where you let it go. And we had the same thing with Marx Brothers, which is like the classy version of the Slushy problem. And so it's interesting that we did learn. It's just because we would with Slushy we got yelled at too many times. And I mean Slushy probably 15 years we were trying to get Slushy made. Marx Brothers, there's probably 5 or 8 years where we kept trying to reconfigure, okay, it's shorter, it's longer. It's a 2-hour TV movie. It's a 4-hour miniseries. It's a 6-hour cable event series. We were constantly trying to just get it onto a screen somehow. But then we would reach a point where we would stop. And there was a day where we said to each other, all right, we're not going to bring up Marx Brothers again. We're going to stop sending that script out. We love it dearly, but it's dead. And when people would come to us and say, hey, what's going on with Marx Brothers? We would say, sadly, it's dead. Right. And that would be the end of the conversation. But with Big Eyes, for some reason, we ignored all those lessons of the past.
Well, part of it I think was because we owned it.
Oh yeah, Well, Slushy we controlled.
Slushy we controlled.
Hey, we still do. Hey, let's go make Slushy, Larry.
We could do one of those like Indiegogo campaigns for Slushy.
Who wants to see an alcoholic snowman? It
was a parody of Rankin Bass Christmas specials.
Oh right.
Yeah, it was about
Those are great.
Yeah, it's really funny. It probably still was really funny.
It's great.
Yeah.
Flash forward, then Tim Burton gets involved.
Yes.
Which you've had a lot of experience with him.
Yeah.
What is that like when you work with the director that you worked with before, because you understand you have a common language, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think particularly with Tim, I think that's one of the reasons why we work with Tim. I mean, even though it was 20 years ago, Ed Wood, we worked with him in between, but we get him and he gets us. So there's almost a mind reading ability, I think, that both sides kind of have. We approached Tim initially as a producer, and he came on on this project initially, just to help us out with like a Tim Burton Presents or something like that to try to get funding for the film, and then later on we actually approached him about swapping places with us, and we would produce and he would direct. So it was Tim. We like working with Tim because Tim. First of all, he really respects our work and our words, and he really, he does justice to them, and he also likes to mix different kind of tones. He's not afraid of making something funny and sad and a thriller all at the same time, kind of. And certainly Ed Wood had that, where there was really, really funny moments, and then there's that touching stuff with Ed and Bella. And Big Eyes, same thing, where there are some really, really funny things in Big Eyes, but then there's also this tragic story of this woman. What Big Eyes has, what the other movies don't have, is kind of a more rousing climax. Like before, you really
female protagonist,
and it's really come from behind victory. What surprised us in these recent screenings is people are cheering, people are applauding, and that I don't know if we've ever written a movie where people cheered.
Well, all the other biopics have bittersweet endings. Is the character gains something, but there's also a big loss too. Someone's dead, or they just made a terrible movie, but they don't know it. But this movie is
or your best friend strangles you with a VCR cord.
Oh, that too.
Bludgeons you to death.
That's always a problem.
With a video camera.
The thing that I loved about it, one of the things was the colors. Mm-hmm. I mean, to look at San Francisco back in the day, and is a Thelonious Monk? They're going to
Cal Jader.
Cal Jader. Right. But just the way, and I think that's what Tim Burton is so good at, is that art direction and the colors.
Right. And an amazing DP, Bruno, did an amazing job on this movie.
Because even when she's painting and looking at those, there was a bit of magic, even though the story, some parts were very intense, like you say. It covers a lot of ground. There is that kind of lyrical, whimsical aspect of the film, and then there's also that hardcore reality that this is a couple that is struggling with abuse. She has this trail of abuse, and it's just a fascinating character study.
Well, I don't think we ever talked about this, but I know when we were going to direct the movie, we had talked a lot about the colors in Margaret's paintings and wanting to use them in the movie. And I'm thinking about the movie now. I think all the attic stuff.
Sure.
The attic stuff, and actually, you know what? Even
nightclub too.
And the painting room. Actually, both painting rooms. The painting room in the attic and the painting room in Woodside, you have a lot of those kind of muddy earth tones and yellows that tend to be in the background of Margaret's paintings.
Well, it's funny because I saw Mike Leigh's Mr. Turner, and there are times when he creates the image so it looks like a Turner painting. Okay. But he did say this has got to be the best. Well, there was some critic who said this is the best film ever made about an artist, which I didn't agree with that.
We have not seen it, so
Well, I mean, you take a guy; it's the last 25 years of his life after he's already successful. Where's the struggle?
Well, that's why we do the anti-great man thing. Is that when we look at movies about great men, we sort of say, where's the struggle? Even so that then the movie sometimes has to be about something else. It has to be about they're an alcoholic, or there's something else going on that, and so we like we make a movie about a movie director is going to be about him directing movies. We make a movie about an artist, it's going to be a movie about him being an artist, and so when you deal with a successful person, it's just a different can of worms.
I mean, at the time we made Ed Wood, I mean, there were a few kind of snarky comments saying, "Oh, great." I mean, this was at the time. No one's made a movie about Alfred Hitchcock. No one's made a movie about Orson Welles. But there's a movie about Ed Wood.
Right.
How did he get picked? And for us, he got picked because we like him. Yeah.
I mean, our movies, for better or worse, we did change the biopic genre a bit. That sense, I think Ed Wood more than the others, where it made people realize, hey, you can make movies about people in the margins. You can make a biopic about pop culture figures who just sort of, relegated to the behind the musics or the E True Hollywood Story.
No one's racing to make a biopic about John Ford.
Exactly.
So you both really love movies, don't you?
Yes,
Sure.
very much so.
Yeah. Is that what led you to this business originally?
I think we love movies.
Right.
We both were young kids with Super 8 cameras.
I mean, I started making stop motion animation when I was about 9 years old. Mm-hmm. Actually, the first movie I ever made was when I was 8 in third grade. Dad came in and taught us all how to use Super 8 camera, and I convinced everyone in my class to make a fake Marx Brothers movie. Oddly enough.
That's fine. I made little kung fu movies.
Yeah.
But I think we're also big movie goers. We love, we just love films, and we love obscure films, and so we tend to be those guys who just are still out there, trying to see as many films as possible, and that we actually met at USC in a line, struck up a conversation about an obscure filmmaker named Herschel Gordon Lewis, and that's how we became friends.
Did you have mentors when you were starting out?
Back in Indiana, I was part of a television show called Beyond Our Control, which was kind of a second city TV for young people. And there was a guy named Dave Williams who ran that show. He died when I was still doing it. And he very much was a figure that I had certainly had dreams of making films before that, but he was someone who made it seem like it could be a reality. And he also, really taught me the basics of comedy writing, and so he was someone who I would think as a very pivotal figure in my life as a mentor.
I would say my two drama teachers, Gene Mullen in junior high and Vicki Francis in high school, who both really encouraged me and gave me a lot of rope. And when I started making movies and I would need to pull favors, like I want to shoot at school on a Saturday, and they would make arrangements to get me in. And then when I wanted to show my movies, they would make arrangements. They would fast talk the principal into giving me the entire auditorium. So I could invite the whole school, to show my work. And they really sort of made me think like this was something that could be that I could do in my life.
I think that's really important for at some point a young person meets an older person and they tell them you're good at this, you can do this, and that somehow sticks in the back of their mind, whether it's fixing a car or writing a screenplay or painting a painting. Someone comes along and says, hey, this is something you could do, and the kid says, oh, maybe this is something I can do.
It's interesting, the movie Whiplash out right now, which I really thought was terrific. And that kind of takes the exact opposite approach with the mentor relationship, which is the person's completely non-supportive.
That's fine. Yeah, you need a supportive person before you can get to that guy, or that guy is just something you got to overcome. I mean, I will say that a person you didn't bring up, Scott, is a writing teacher.
Oh, my favorite writing teacher, Jim Boyle.
It wasn't. It's funny. He's not really a mentor. We had zero personal relationship with this guy, but he looked at screenplays as kind of architecture, as graphic design.
Yeah, I thought he was brilliant. He taught at USC when we were there, and then there was something happened, and he didn't have tenure, and then he suddenly disappeared, and I felt really bad for all the students who came after me because they didn't get to take Jim, and he had these brilliant ideas that this screenplay is a text which is as valid as the movie. And that you want the experience of reading a screenplay to be as exciting as the experience of watching the film, and like 1 page of a script equals 1 minute of a movie. It should also be 1 minute of reading, and if it's a funny scene, you should be laughing out loud, and if it's a scary scene, you should be scared. And it was just a lot about how you visually design the prose on the page to sort of equal the experience of watching the film. And he would talk about people like E.E. Cummings, who sort of use the words on the page visually to to sort of make you see what they're writing about. It's I think it's really cool stuff, and I still live by it every day. And I think our scripts sort of have a clean read and a visceral read that a lot of other scripts don't have, sort of because of Jim.
Does it get easier, the writing, or is it always a struggle?
No, it doesn't get easier at all.
Nah.
That does, yeah. It's just, you know, yeah. It maybe gets grumpier.
Do you deal with writer's block, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, of course you do. But the plus is that
we do now with a lot of distraction.
Yes.
Which enables writer's block. I think maybe the internet and email has been a bad thing for writing because you're just constantly distracted.
Right.
And
now, sometimes you can confuse that distraction with doing like, I need another word for that, and you go looking for something. But while you're doing that, you end up at Amazon at some point, and you're buying something all of a sudden.
Yeah,
it's like, what the heck's going on?
You know, I need to take that my favorite synonym book and just put it back on the desk.
Yeah.
Because because it means I would have to get out of my chair and walk 3 feet.
Right.
So instead, I just go to Google synonym, and the words are never really that good. And my little pink synonym book is really a good book, but it would mean I'd have to get out of my chair.
What do you think it is about your films that resonates so much with audiences? Because just the body of work, Man in the Moon, the Larry Flynt film, now Big Eyes.
I mean, they look at life through the eyes of outsiders, and I think that's one of our connections with both Tim Burton and Milos Forman. That they sort of have that sort of they know how to capture the spirit of an outsider.
I mean, a lot of I find it exciting that I've got 3 youngish kids, and both my boys are in college now, and so a lot of high schoolers have passed through my house in recent years, and I find it really cool and surprising that they've discovered our movies on cable. God bless HBO. HBO runs Larry Flynt into the ground, and it's really cool to me that all these years later these movies really stick with these kids, and the kids really find something in them. And maybe it's that thing that every 16-year-old in the world feels like an outsider, and our movies are all about people who feel like they're outside the glass looking in. And so maybe that's why they always connect.
Until next time, this is Mark Gordon, and I'll see you center stage.
Hello, this is Homer Simpson. Whenever I want to know what's going on in the entertainment world, I listen to Center Stage with Mark Gordon.